Okay, so we all think we have a pretty good handle on the past, right? You know, the big names, the major events, the general order of things. But what if I told you that some of the most basic facts you learned in school are, well, completely wrong?
Because history isn't always what it seems. Honestly, sometimes it's way stranger, funnier, and just more unbelievable than any movie you could dream up. And look, this stuff might sound fake, but I promise you, every single thing we're about to cover is 100% true.
All right, first up, let's talk about time. Because that mental timeline we all have in our heads, yeah, it's probably a total mess.
When you think of ancient Egypt, I bet you picture Cleopatra and the Great Pyramids hanging out together, right? But check this out. The pyramids were already ancient when she was born. We're talking over 2,500 years old. Now here's where it gets really mind-bending. Let's compare Cleopatra's time to something a bit more modern, like the first moon landing. You're probably thinking, what's the connection? Well, the timeline's going to shock you.
Just look at this. The gap between the pyramids and Cleopatra is longer than the gap between Cleopatra and us landing on the moon. She lived closer in time to the iPhone than to the building of the Great Pyramid. Just let that sink in for a second.
Okay, you ready for another one? Let's take Oxford University, with all its old-school medieval buildings, and the powerful Aztec Empire, rulers of ancient Mesoamerica. Quick, which one do you think is older?
Believe it or not, people were already studying at Oxford for more than 300 years before the Aztec Empire was even a thing. The university is way, way older. And yeah, most people get this completely wrong.
So if our idea of the timeline is that warped, just imagine how strange the actual events of history were. Let's dive into some of the absolute weirdest moments.
We think of wars as these long, drawn-out conflicts that last for years. And usually they are, but not always. The shortest war in recorded history was the Anglo-Zanzibar War back in 1896. And when I say it was short, I mean it was really short. How short, you ask?
38 minutes? That's it. That is barely enough time to watch a TV show. The British gave an ultimatum, Zanzibar said no, and 38 minutes later, it was all over. I mean, I can't even decide what to order for lunch in that amount of time.
You know, the Romans were famous for their incredible engineering, their complex politics, and those super white togas. So how did they get them so bright without any modern bleach? Well, the answer is, you might want to sit down for this one. They used pee. Yeah, specifically aged human urine. They literally collected it in public pots, let it sit for a while, and the ammonia that formed was a surprisingly powerful cleaning agent. I am not making this up. That is definitely one historical fact I'm glad we left in the past. All right, let's talk about one of history's greatest military minds, Napoleon Bonaparte. This guy conquered most of Europe. His strategies are still studied in military academies today. You'd think the man was invincible. Except for that one time he was attacked and forced into a full-on retreat by a swarm of rabbits. No, seriously. He had organized a rabbit hunt to celebrate a treaty, but when the cages were opened, the bunnies didn't run away. They charged right at Napoleon and his men. They actually had to flee. The Emperor of France, defeated by bunnies.
We've all heard the story about George Washington and his wooden teeth, right? It's become this symbol of his simple, honest character. But just like a lot of history, that story is a total myth. So what were his dentures actually made of? It was this bizarre cocktail of things: human teeth, cow teeth, and elephant ivory. But the main component was carved hippopotamus ivory, not a single splinter of wood anywhere. And that's not even the weirdest part of presidential history. Okay, for this last section, let's just go ahead and shatter some of history's biggest myths, the stuff you see in every movie that is just plain wrong. What's the very first thing you think of when I say Viking? Horned helmets, right? Wrong. There is absolutely zero archaeological evidence that Vikings ever wore horned helmets into battle. The whole look? It came from a costume designer for an opera in the 1800s. It was just for show.
Ah, the Eiffel Tower. It's impossible to even imagine Paris without it. It feels like this timeless monument that was always meant to be there. But the truth? It was actually built to be torn down.
It was just supposed to be a temporary entrance for the 1889 World's Fair, and it was scheduled to be demolished in 1909. The only reason it's still standing today is because its height made it a perfect antenna for the newfangled radio. Technology literally saved it from the scrapyard.
The Great Fire of London in 1666. The name itself just sounds like total destruction, right? The whole city just burned to the ground. That's the story we all hear anyway.
But the reality is a little different. The fire was absolutely devastating for sure, but mostly to the old medieval city center. That part was only about 15% of the Greater London area at the time. The vast majority of the city, totally untouched. History never mentions the details, does it?
And let's end on one last absolutely staggering number, 1,700. That's how many common English words William Shakespeare either invented or was the first person to ever write down. Words you use every day, like eyeball, swagger, and fashionable. He didn't just write our stories, he literally built our language.
It really just goes to show so much of what we think of as solid fact is just a simplified story. It makes you wonder, what else have we gotten wrong? Which one of these facts totally blew your mind? Let me know. The past is always out there just waiting to surprise us.